George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
How many headless children in Gaza will it take before anyone with any power decides to do something about it? And who ordered the hit on the British journalist RichardMedhurst, seized under the Terrorism Act at the door of an aeroplane in Heathrow Airport and held for almost 24 hours incommunicado? It's almost too much to bear. And the sight of race-baiting, multi-millionaire hypocrites like the Obamas twerking for moist-eyed millennials and baby boomers, formerly anti-war, still anti-racist, is too much to bear also, at least for me. I cannot look at the DNC for 1 minute longer. And what exactly is going on in the Ukraine, in the invasion by Ukraine of the Russian territory of Kursk? It's all coming up over the next 2 hours here on the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
You knew RichardMedhurst when he was a young, new kid on the block with huge potential. Now he's still young, but he has an enormous reach across the world. He is a journalist of international renown. He comes from 1,000 years of Medhursts in England. Both of his parents are Nobel Peace Prize winners for their work at the United Nations. His father is a former Metropolitan Police officer. His grandfather, a former pilot in the Royal Air Force in the Second World War. His grandfather served the British Army in the First World War. He is a man of unimpeachable, impeccable character, which is why he was seized by 6 police officers. 6 police officers at the door of an aeroplane when it touched down at Heathrow Airport in London at the weekend, where Medhurst was to address a conference, which was also addressed by some of the most well-known radical and progressive political figures in the country. They had no idea where RichardMedhurst was. He went black. His phone was unobtainable. He was incognito in a prison cell in handcuffs under the Terrorism Act of 2000. I was in Parliament when that act was passed. I railed against it then. Little did I know that it would so quickly come to be used against journalists, far more often than it's used against terrorists. The conflation of journalism with terrorism is what led to Julian Assange and his more than 1 decade of calvary at the hands of the British state at the behest of the American empire. It is the same body of legislation which led to the seizure of another friend of ours, another British journalist living and working abroad, Kit Clarenberg of the Grey Zone. It is the same body of legislation which led to the seizure and the searching and similar incognito disappearance, incommunicado disappearance of a former British ambassador and parliamentary candidate at the last general election, the Honourable Craig Murray, former British ambassador to Uzbekistan. Are you seeing a pattern here? Are you seeing a pattern which says that every time the British Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Foreign Office, the British government actually has the gall, the neck, to put out a message saying journalism is not a crime, they mean journalism in Russia is not a crime when it's carried out by the Wall Street Journal or some other US oligarch serving publication. That's the journalism that's not a crime. The journalism which is a crime is British journalists having to move overseas in order to beat the algorithm, in order to beat the arrest at an airport. In Medhurst's case, in handcuffs, transported in a mobile cage to a dungeon somewhere where even his parents, his lawyer, and his hosts at the weekend conference he'd come to speak at could not reach him, did not know if he was alive or dead. Medhurst is on the show in the second hour. You'll want to stay tuned for him to tell you the story from the horse's mouth. But as a long-serving, long-term, seven-term parliamentarian who saw all of this legislation going through Parliament at the hands of a Labour government, it has come as no surprise to me that it was a Labour government that arrested Richard Medhurst at the weekend. I knew that it would all come to this. Medhurst could not be more unequivocally opposed to terrorism. There is no person writing and broadcasting today who has denounced the British government's support of terrorism in Libya and in Syria. The British government are the friends of the terrorists in the Middle East, and not just the non-governmental terrorist organizations. I saw footage again today that I sincerely hope my children never see. I sincerely hope my elderly, almost 90-year-old mother does not see. I'm pretty glad that so far my own wife hasn't seen it. It was a child about the age of some of my own children and some of my own grandchildren. Its head flipped open to reveal nothing, a void. Its entire brains had been blown out by terrorism who attacked yet another United Nations school in the Gaza Strip. Salahuddin School was a precise hit on Hamas terrorists, say the terrorist government in Tel Aviv, where just in the last few days, an entire queue of statesmen have turned up yet again to shake the hand of the blood-soaked murderer Netanyahu. But if it was a forensic, accurate, intelligence-led hit on Hamas terrorists, why did it blow that little kid's brains out? Why did it kill 5 women and 10 children? Why did it murder and mutilate still more women and children in Gaza. We know from their previous hits in Tehran, in Beirut, in Damascus, Israel, and in Sidon in Lebanon today, a very precise hit on a single motor vehicle with a single target inside it. Why then must they murder, mutilate, maim tens of thousands of children, tens of thousands of women in an 11-month period in which they have murdered and maimed, getting on for 1 in 5. 1 in 5 of the prisoners inside the concentration camp known as the Gaza Strip. More importantly, from our point of view, at least, at what point will the number of beheaded children be too much for our ministers and our politicians? How many mutilated bodies of women and children will it take for this issue to appear on the news? The child I just watched will never appear on Western news, and not for reasons of taste, not at all, but because to broadcast footage of that nature would begin to unravel the manufactured consent of the public in the belligerent countries, primarily the United States and the United Kingdom. Other countries are available and involved, but there is no doubt that the head of this particular snake, a two-headed snake, is the government in Washington and the government in London, without whose money, weapons, material, diplomatic, political, and media support, that consent would quickly be unmanufactured. That was thrown into sharp relief in the last 48 hours as we watched the hideous, obscene, grotesque perambulations of the so-called Democratic Party at their annual convention. It's a rigged convention, of course. They even force, a bit like when the mafia used to send the leaders of the killing coalitions to the funerals of the rivals and fellow mob bosses that they had slain. They forced poor Joe Biden, bemused, bewildered, terrified he was going to do it in his trousers again on live television. Joe Biden went there even though he himself had been the victim of a political hit. And his assassins were all there to applaud him and to praise him. They praised his honesty and integrity in the very week that the American Congress revealed that the Biden family were enriched by $27 million during the course of Joe Biden's term as vice president some years ago. If you get $27 million worth of corruption as Barack Obama's vice president, is it any wonder that Barack Obama now has a property estate in New York, in Chicago, in the Hamptons, in Washington, D.C., and in Hawaii that would make a prince blush? The corruption of the American political class was nowhere more evident than in the performances, for performances they were, of Big Mike Obama as the warm-up act for her husband, Barack Obama. When Obama was elected first to Congress, he stated bluntly that he was broke. Now he's worth $100 million. And the property empire that he and Michelle have built keeps on growing. That would be of no concern to me. I'm not remotely envious of other people's money or houses. If they weren't up on a stage twerking class war rhetoric, and if they weren't up on a stage twerking anti-white, anti-racism sentiments, trying to whip up the ghetto into voting for a man and a woman's recommended candidate, namely Kamala Harris, who is now very firmly in the hood, having spent most of her life as an Indian-American politician. She's now down with the kids in the hood. The Obamas, who live in lily-white Hamptons, were up there talking about how this whole Democratic gig, this whole campaign of Kamala Harris represented a rising of people of color in the United States of America, when none of them, neither Barack nor Michelle nor Kamala, have ever done a damn thing for black people, for poor people, for working class people. The only thing they've done is fill their own pockets with dirty money from their time in public office. And I couldn't watch it anymore, because as I watched them all partying, I got to thinking about those headless children in Gaza being lacerated, being mutilated by weapons given to Netanyahu by Joe Biden and by Kamala Harris, and with the support of Barack Obama, with the support of Michelle Obama, with the support of Bill Clinton. He's worth $250 million, by the way. He's an even bigger grifter than the Obamas, at least a more successful one. All of these people are responsible for these headless children in Gaza. All of these people are working for the political forces behind Benjamin Netanyahu. All of these people are hirelings of the war lobby in the United States. Which brings me, we've got a very clever colonel, former Pentagon official, also coming up in the second hour of the show, brings me to what on earth is happening in Russia. I saw President Putin today with Mr. Kadyrov, the Chechen leader, in front of a vast army of Chechen reserves about to go to the front line. The NATO ghouls and their slave media have been dancing with joy over the Ukrainian invasion of Russia over the last week. Yes, you heard that right. The Ukrainian invasion of Russia over the last week. But as so often, when you read the Financial Times or you read Bloomberg, the publications, the networks dedicated to keeping the rich informed as opposed to the hoi polloi, as opposed to the poor plebs who have to have sand thrown in their face, Bloomberg has pointed out that this so-called victory of the Ukrainians in breaching the defenses of Russia itself has actually hastened and made much more likely to be total defeat of Ukraine by the Russian armed forces. And very soon, the front line of the Ukrainian forces is collapsing as we speak. We'll be talking about all of these things on the show. We'll be talking about Richard Medhurst. We'll be talking about the war in Ukraine. We'll be talking about the DNC and the fake black people up there on the platform, and I include one on whom I shall close. The squad, the fraud squad, AOC, went up there as a keynote speaker, just as Barack Obama once did, for the so-called left wing of the Democratic Party. She claimed that Kamala Harris is working tirelessly to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza, the return of hostages, and a permanent solution to the crisis, never-ending, of Israel-Palestine. Every word of it was a lie. She knew that it was a lie. She knew that we knew that it was a lie. She was the lipstick on the pig of the Democratic Party, whose emblem is not a pig, but should be. You've come to the right place to discuss these matters with us this evening. It is the mother of all talk shows.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got that on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
It'll always be unfinished business for me. You get that film absolutely free if you support us on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. And there's a lot more original content beginning to appear. I've just begun to record a short history of Yasser Arafat, the first of many dozens of short histories that I'll be doing from my perspective, with my experience, and in many cases, my personal knowledge and experience of the people and the events that we'll be covering. You get my killings of Tony Blair, you get Killing Kelly, and you'll get the short histories and many other things, and the ability to have a conversation with me on the Patreon page. It costs the price of a cup of tea per week in a cafe. I hope you think I'm worth it. Has the Earth been visited by UFOs? This was billed by our editor as a holiday poll, a light-hearted kind of thing. Answer yes or no. Personally, I can think of no subject more important. I'm hoping that what we saw in California in the last few days, the most dramatic footage I have ever seen, looked like people visiting from outer space to tell us to stop doing what we're doing, not to destroy our planet, as they perhaps had seen many planets destroy themselves before. It may be wishful thinking on my part, but I'd rather vote for a little green man from Mars than for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, for that matter. But you can at least cast a vote on whether or not you think the Earth has ever been visited by UFOs, yes or no. You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. You can vote on my Twitter, my X. You can vote on the YouTube community poll, or you can vote on the YouTube stream. If you are watching on the YouTube stream, please subscribe to my channel. I am rapidly heading towards 500,000 subscribers. And although we have problems with YouTube, about which more later, there will be the need to continue to appear on YouTube, and you'll help me cheat the algorithm out to suppress me if you will subscribe and like the show and share it with others of your friends and contacts. You can call the show toll-free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. You can call free of charge in the UK or Ireland, 0808 196 5522. And if you're elsewhere in the world, get your call in now on 44203 966 2625. Sabrina Salvati is the host of Sabby's Sabs podcast, a wonderful watch, a co-host of Revolutionary Blackout Network. I'm sure she's been as enthralled by the opening of the DNC as anyone. Sabrina, thank you very much indeed for joining us again. Maybe I was too harsh on Barack and Michelle, but I simply can't bear. My mother used to say, when she heard a woman swear, she used to say, Our Lady weeps when she hears a woman swear. I want to weep when I see a black person in American politics saying and doing the same wicked and evil things that white politicians and white leaders in the United States have always done. Is that unfair of me?
No, it's not unfair. I think when you look at people like Michelle Obama and Barack Obama, people have to realize that they are not representative of majority of the African-American community in the United States. They are a part of an elite bubble that the majority of us will never see or never entertain. And they are also a part of that Clinton circle. And so was Kamala Harris, by the way. That's why Kamala Harris was tapped to be the nominee. That's why she had the approval of the Clintons when she was running for Senate. These are certain people that have decided to play the game in order to get ahead. And the majority of Americans are not playing that game. Unfortunately, people still fall for the usual Democrat tricks of, if you don't vote for us, you're going to get Trump. And what I tell my audience is that there will always be a Trump. There will always be Republican opposition. But if you don't push the Democratic Party to fit your needs and your wants, if you don't get the Democratic Party to meet your demands, then you're just doing this for show.
And what a show it was. Kamala Harris has now raised in excess of $1 billion. They've spent God knows how many millions of dollars on this jamboree in Chicago. Chicago is on lockdown. The entire city has been effectively turned into an armed camp to protect a party that's supposed to be the party of the people, but they can't let the people get anywhere near them. Am I right?
You are correct. That area was blocked off, although I did see a couple of videos where protesters were able to break through at least one of the barriers. But this is a class divide that I want people to really understand. The people that you see at this convention that are on the stage that are telling you to support Kamala Harris, they don't even want to talk to the working class people that are outside protesting against a genocide. They don't want to talk to the everyday common man. If you look at Kamala Harris's campaign right now, notice she's not giving any interviews. You not see Kamala Harris out there meeting with the everyday average worker. I'm talking about the people that are working at Dunkin' Donuts, the people who are waiting tables. She's not speaking to those people. She's speaking to people that are part of a certain academic class and a certain, economic class. And that's very unfortunate for the Democratic Party, but this has been happening for quite some time.
Is it working, though? You say some people always fall for it, and of course that's true on this side of the Atlantic as on yours, that vote for us because we're not the other guy, of course guarantees the triumph of evil, the idea of voting for the lesser of two evils, even if you could work out who is the lesser of two evils in these pictures. Only means that evil always wins. The truth is, Kamala Harris is co-responsible for every single ill in America over the last 3.5 years. I mean, the Democrats have controlled the Congress for 12 out of the last 16 years. They hold the White House now, and yet it's all Trump's fault. Do people fall for this?
Unfortunately, some Americans do fall for it. A lot of people don't, I would say in the Democratic Party, didn't blame Kamala Harris for the genocide, for example, or the economic situations that we have in this country, like the inflation. They primarily blame Joe Biden and hold him responsible for that. And that's why we saw such a big shift in the polls once Kamala Harris was selected. And I say selected because no one voted for Kamala Harris in the 2024 Democrat primary. She was selected by leaders of the Democratic Party. And not even Barack Obama, from what I understand, what happened behind the scenes. He wanted to have an open primary, but Joe Biden went ahead and endorsed Kamala Harris, which forced Obama's hand. The problem that you run into is that a lot of people have Trump derangement syndrome. So they're willing to do whatever they can not to get Donald Trump. What is also unfortunate is that some people are not making the connection to the genocide in Gaza with Kamala Harris, even though her campaign has publicly stated that she will not support an arms embargo to Israel and she would not condition any aid to Israel. So unfortunately, if Kamala Harris wins, I think that part of the base is just going to have to wait to see this for themselves. But I've been trying to educate my viewers that you can vote against genocide. I will be supporting Jill Stein. And I think something that the UK has that we really need in this country, we need multiple parties in this country that can get on the ballot. And with the Green Party in particular, it has been a Democratic Party that has been pushing the Green Party off the ballot in multiple states. But luckily, Jill Stein has been able to beat back most of those. But we need a working party for working people in this country, similar to what you have now in the UK. And that's the only pathway forward. That organizing mutual aid and building dual power. And that is how you are going to get transformative change. You are not going to get transformative change in this country in the two-party system because both of those parties are owned by Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, and also Israel.
Now, there is another new force. I'm also a big supporter and friend of Dr. Jill Stein and wish her every success. But Robert Kennedy, who on many, many issues would have been an outstanding third force candidate, but made it impossible for people like you and me to support him in any way by the obscenity of his take on the Israel-Palestine questions. But he is on 5% of the vote practically everywhere. And there is talk now that he's going to stand down and throw his weight behind Trump. How do you think that will work out?
I predicted this would happen a couple of months ago because the campaign was running out of funds. That's usually the first sign, losing money there. But I think that I know for a fact that they already canceled an appearance that was supposed to happen in Utah. So they've already canceled that. That's another sign. I think that that will help out Trump in the polls because some of RFK Jr. supporters have told me personally that if RFK Jr. drops out, they'll be supporting Donald Trump. So I think if he does join Donald Trump, that would help Donald Trump in the polls. That being said, I still think this is going to be a close race, and it's going to come down to the swing states as it has before. That's what people really need to focus on. They need to focus on how are these candidates polling in those key swing states and not look at the national polls, because Hillary Clinton was winning in the national polls. But obviously, as you saw, even though she won the popular vote, she lost the 2016 election because she did not win in those key swing states. So it's really going to come down to states like Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, even Arizona may be at play. So those are the states that people need to focus on. But I think RFK Jr., if he were to drop out, which it looks like that's going to happen, and join Donald Trump, I think that will help Donald Trump in the polls.
Donald Trump Jr. said he'd love to see RFK Jr. in his father's administration as the head of one of the three-letter agencies, and he'd love to watch him blow that agency up, whichever of the three-letter agencies it was. That would be a public service, would it not?
I agree with that. That is one of the things I did agree with RFK Jr. about is these agencies like the FBI and the CIA, a lot of times they've spent their time and their funds going after everyday people that are activists. They've gone after journalists. The FBI, let's not forget, they targeted and killed Fred Hampton. They went after MLK. They went after Malcolm X. So I'm no fan of those alphabet letter agencies. And that is where I did agree with RFK Jr. about that particular issue. That being said, I think people are putting a little too much faith in Donald Trump, thinking that he's going to take on the deep state. He said that the first time that he ran, that he was going to drain the swamp. That did not happen. And if you look at his cabinet, you'll see implementing someone like J.D. Vance, who is attached to Peter Thiel, he is essentially putting the deep state in his cabinet. So I think that people should not take Donald Trump at his word when he says he's going to go after the deep state.
Absolutely. On that or anything else. Sabi, tell the viewers how they can follow and support your work.
Yes, you can find me on YouTube. My channel is Sabby Sabs, and you can also find me at Revolutionary Blackout Network, also on YouTube as well.
Thanks very much for joining us, and the best of luck to you. Sabrina Salvati, the host of Sabby Sabs podcast, definitely worth checking out. Has the Earth been visited by UFOs? Yes or no? It's up to you. It's quite close, actually, and the numbers are climbing. Almost 20,000 people have already voted. Get your vote in before the end of the show. Let me take a quick break, then it's your calls right up to the hour. Stay tuned. Let me say that you can listen to the audio-only version of MOATS on our MOATS podcast, and the numbers on that are going through the roof. Just search MOATS with George Galloway on Apple, Spotify, Google, or whichever platform you listen to your podcasts on. In recent weeks, it's been the #1 political podcast in Benin, Jordan, the Gambia, Qatar, Jamaica, Ghana, Iceland, Malaysia, Singapore, Sweden, and the Philippines. #1 political podcast in all those countries. Truly, truly phenomenal. Do you know that BBC News has lost 40% of its audience in the last 2 years? It's official. And of course, that is the sensible thing to do. But to get people to tune in and change course and listen to a radically different point of view is even more difficult. But it's happening. And the numbers that we are racking up are now in their millions.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
That podcast is going great guns. It's in the top 20 in China. I'll never get over that statistic. And in Egypt and Pakistan this week. It's in the top 10 in the UAE, the Gambia, Jordan, and Mexico. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on the corner of your screen now. Let's take the first call of the evening. It's from Eves in Florida, but about Ukraine. Eve, welcome.
Thank you very much to have me on your show. I wanted to talk about Kursk. It has been known for a while that Ukrainian soldiers don't go randomly on the front. For instance, people from Hungarian origin will go to the worst place on the front, while the Russophobic people of the West will be a little bit back to shoot in the back of those soldiers who want to surrender or who want to leave their position because it's not possible to defend them. The good news for Russia, and the big mistake, I think, of the Kursk offensive, is that they took those Russophobic brigade that the West qualified as the best unit, but they're not the best unit. They are simply people coming from Galicia and from Volhynia, from the west of Ukraine, and they send those people to Kursk. They are going to be killed in Kursk, and they're going to allow more Ukrainians to surrender to the Russian on the east part, and hopefully the whole front will finally collapse. So this Kursk offensive, I think, is a very good news as far as the end of the war. Now, the big danger for me is Transnistria, because I think the last move of the Ukrainian would be to make a move on Transnistria, and that will be very difficult for Russia to defend those people. That was what I wanted to say.
I worry myself about Transnistria, but the people there will not go quietly into that good night, I can assure you, Eve. Thanks for the call. Sean is in Washington, D.C. on Kamala. Go ahead, Sean.
Well, thank you so much for having me, you and Savvy Sab. I just would like to just reveal, I just learned about you in Savvy literally within the past, since October 7th, and I love you both, and I love you for new acquaintances.
Thank you.
But I would like to say that I am what they would call, a Black American, but my classification is that I'm a descendant of U.S. chattel slavery, and my legal classification in this country is a freedman. And what I would like to tell your people in the world, that Kamala is a complete facade. We do not, in the grassroots, they do not give us a voice. We do not support Kamala. We do not say that just because you're Black, you're the proper person to be in the position of power, because these people have been co-opted. And we, as who you call ourselves, the twerking African Americans and things, I know you have the propaganda, but that's not us. We're in the belly of the beast, and we're working our way out of this beast. And part of the mind control is this. Here it is. It's the theme of democracy, but it's not a theme of democracy when our country, and we know it because we've been here with what you call Zionists. We've been with them since 1776. We know them all too well. Okay, so the terrorists all of a sudden are always people who are Muslim. The terrorists are people who are brown skinned. The terrorists are everything but the people with red hair and blonde hair and blue eyes. We know this is a farce. And communism, all of these titles, the communists. The communists was the Chinese. The Chinese are no longer communists. These people are trying to conduct business and to have peace in the world. Russia is the boogeyman. Russia never enslaved black people. Russia was fighting Nazism and fought Germany to free the Jews. Now we've got the Muslims. The Muslims are the animals, and these Palestinians, these people, they welcome the Jews, okay? It seems to me that everybody wants peace but us. And the common denominator is what we are doing. And we understand this. We don't speak out, but I'm speaking out. And you do it in the name of democracy. But democracy is not trying to eliminate citizens. Up in Chicago, there's a big immigrant clash. And they're denying citizens from coming in to town halls and committee meetings and asking them for ID. Okay, you're such a hypocrite. You said for the black people, voter ID, it's voter ID discrimination. You're asking them for ID, but yet you're asking citizens to come in Chicago to speak their piece and to give their a take on what's going on with open borders, and you're trying to make them do IDs. Democracy is not filing lawsuits. The DNC is filing lawsuits for third candidates like Jill Stein, like Dr. Sheba. They're literally using money to keep them off the ballot because they don't want the American people to know the third alternative voice. It's not just Kamala, and I call her Giggles. It's not just Giggles and the Orange Man. What they're doing is, if you look at it deeply, you're not about democracy if you're filing lawsuits to get other voices off of the main ticket. And we say hell no to Genocide Joe. Hell no to Genocide Joe. And Kamala is just an extension of Genocide Joe. We do not accept it. Everything that they're doing in Palestine, irrespective of your color, of your religion, it's anti-God. It's anti-Christ.
Absolutely.
It's anti-humanitarianism.
Sean, what a wonderful call. You may only have heard of us since October 7th, but we hope you'll stay with us always and that you'll be a regular caller, a regular contributor to the show. Much obliged to you for that call. KD Mazzo says, I agree, both parties are in bed with Israel and a new party in the States needs to be created, not influenced by Israel. Well, it does, but there are third parties in this race, and I commend some of them to the voters. Torwin says, why does it feel like Trump is blowing what should be an easy election? I know what you're saying there. To me, Trump's lost a bit of vim. Maybe people are determining that behind the scenes. Tim Kangaroo says, I'm willing to take a chance on Jill Stein, but sadly, she doesn't stand a chance of winning. Well, if everybody voted for her, she'd win in a landslide. If you are persuaded that she's the best candidate, you need to vote for her as a matter of moral choice. Now, we'll be going later to Simon from Weaponized News, but let's hear from Josh in London first, I think, on the Battle of the Bulge 2.0. I'm all ears, Josh.
Oh, hi, George. How are you doing? You all right?
Good, thank you.
I was just going to say, George, that I honestly think that, as I say, the parallels between, what's happening now in Kursk and what happened in 1943, there are, some similarities, like the geographical location, obviously, and the use of German tanks on the battlefield for the first time in nearly 80 years. Well, the first time in 80 years in Russia, anyway. But, I think this is where the kind of the parallel, the sort of the commonalities ends, because and we're already seeing this with, Petrovsk nearly imminently falling, and, in the Donbass, as well as Toretsk as well. under siege. What I'm saying is the forces that Zelensky is expending in this little salient of his are going to be sorely, I don't know if they're elite troops, but they're going to be sorely missed when it comes to battling for the rest of Donbass itself, in much the same way that Hitler used his
well, they'll be trapped
unit.
there, Josh. They'll be trapped and killed there. And the Donbass, as you rightly say, has virtually now collapsed and been liberated in its entirety from the point of view of the Kiev government. So if the Donetsk is lost and this Battle of the Bulge is lost, it's curtains for little Vladimir Zelensky. Josh, thanks for the call. Paul Meany says the Russophobia, Sinophobia, Arabophobia, Palestiniaphobia is so strikingly revealing in the US and NATO regimes. It has flashbacks with Nazi Germany during the 1930s and 40s. Truly sickening. Indeed, let's go to Simon from Florida, as he used to be called, but now he's got his own outfit, and a very good one. It's called Weaponized News. So it's Simon from Weaponized News. Welcome back, Simon.
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. Now, particularly with an African flavour today, so I hope that your podcast, doing so well as it is in Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa, will appreciate your redirection of your attention, possibly for a few minutes, from the Middle East to the continent of Africa, where in the last few days, the 15th Chinese ambassador to Nigeria has arrived to take up his post. His name is Mr. Yu Dun-hai, and he has written a most extraordinary, noteworthy example of soft power in his letter of greeting to the Nigerian people that has been published just yesterday in the Nigeria Today publication. And I think as a contrast between the manner in which China is exerting its influence in the world as opposed to the United States or indeed NATO and the golden billion, it is very much worth all of your audience having regard to that. They can find it on my Twitter feed. And it's so extraordinary that on my show tonight, that will be broadcast at 7 p.m. New York time, so possibly a little late for some of your European viewers, I intend to go through it sentence by sentence. It's been sent not only in the newspaper, but also from his personal Twitter feed. And it is one of the most brilliant outreaches to a nation, listing all of the ties that they have had for over 50 years, and even pointing out the coincidence that Nigeria's Independence Day and China's National Day both fall on October the 1st. But one of the things that draws the entire attention of the African continent, with all of its varied cultures and languages, is the fact that in the first week of September, a project that has been worked on by President Xi and his diplomatic staff since he stayed behind in South Africa after the BRICS 2023 meeting is finally coming to fruition in 12 days in Beijing. And it's going to be the first forum on China-Africa cooperation, an extremely ambitious project and something that you needlessly will want to review after its full 5 days of occurrence in Beijing, with many, many, many African leaders in attendance. It should also be pointed out that on Friday, since we do occasionally look forward not only to ghastly things which have happened in recent days, the foreign minister of Russia, after each of these individual institutions have been giving very substantial extended interviews talking about their history and their future, for the Commonwealth of Independent States, SCO, BRICS, the Eurasian Economic Union, and also the Collective Security Treaty Organization, he's going to be giving a speech called The Territory of Meanings about how all 5 of those organizations are going to be weaved together in the near future. And so I think that we've got some big events coming up that the Western media, despite the fact that the Daily Telegraph have lifted their paywall to provide a full page without paying for the Israeli foreign minister to publish his hateful propaganda, there are actually some positive developments happening in other places of the world.
There are, and it all looks to me, Simon, that a kind of alternative United Nations is hoving into view. We'll talk about that perhaps next time we meet. Thanks, Simon, from Weaponized News. Definitely a must-watch for the people in that hemisphere at 7 p.m. and for the rest of us on catch-up. Ola is in Poland, but wants to talk about Trump and Kamala. I told you, it's the global university of the airwaves. Ola, welcome back.
Yeah, George, good evening, and good evening to your audience. I would like to say something. I like your shirt, by the way. I think you're wearing a white shirt, and I like your hat also, the black hat.
Thank you. Very kind.
How do I link that to what I want to say? You see, I follow politics back in my home country, Nigeria. And one thing is common to political discourse during transition or democratic process in making like election period. You see, politicians always come with different promises, right? And one of the strategy they use is basic propaganda that everybody believes, right? And so long as people still speak about, oh, he is black, he is white, I think we are all giving credence to this brainwashing that has been going on for ages. Because technically, I look at your shirt, I've not seen any human being on the planet Earth that has the color of your shirt, which is white, that science has taught us to be white. And I've not seen anybody on this planet with the color of your heart, which is black, that science has taught us to be black. So when we start admitting or, segregating people, oh, this is white, this is black, it's just pure propaganda and it's political. And it's meant to divide the people and to rule. Coming back to Trump, you read something recently from one of the charts that he's blowing up. Obviously, he's blowing up. Why? Because he just realized that election in the U.S. or elsewhere is amongst the elite. Democracy works, but it works better amongst the elites, not amongst the population, because where you actually see the real democratic process is amongst the elites. And I think you were a victim of this in the UK election recently, where somebody, a prime minister that does not have the majority of the support, is actually the sitting prime minister of the United Kingdom. It shows that it's something within the elite. And I think Donald Trump is just realizing this. And that's why he's going bonkers, like, I'm all for Israel. If you don't support Israel, we chase you out of the United States. Come on, it's not logical.
Yeah, he's going to deport. He's going to deport any of us who support Palestine. Ola, that's very interesting. Your metaphor was a good one. White people spend a lot of money and a lot of time trying to turn brown, and even some brown people spend money trying to become white, and it's all nonsense. It's only pigmentation. It's only melanin. It means nothing. But you don't only get racism between white people and black. You are originally from Nigeria, which is riven and divided by racism, by tribal divisions, by people trying to break the country up, by people trying to make sure that their tribe is the top dog, and so on. So we have many problems in the United States, in the United Kingdom, but also very much in Nigeria. Ola, thanks for that call. Kappa Joy says if folks would stop saying that Jill Stein can't win and actually vote for her, George is correct. She'd win in a landslide. Get federal funding and onto the debate stage. Do it. Hashtag Jill Stein 2024. And Alternative Media Joint Center says, I believe the most important strategy in the coming US election should be not letting any of the two major candidates get more than 50% of the electoral votes. Very interesting. Coming up after a short break is Daniel L. Davis, host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive, which if you've seen, you'll know he is well worth watching and listening to. I'll be right back after this short break. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Officer on deck, officer on deck. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis, to be precise, host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive. And it's been far too long putting us together on the same screen, Lieutenant Colonel, and I'm very glad to be with you tonight, and I hope to be on your show reciprocally before too long. There's so many wars to talk about with you, it's difficult to know where to start, but as the current most likely source of nuclear war in the world, let's start with the Russia-Ukraine war. The invasion of Russia using NATO weapons, German tanks, NATO mercenaries, in Kursk of all places. You would have thought a German tank would have turned round and ran when it was asked to go to Kursk, the source of the greatest defeat in a tank battle ever, one which changed the course of the Second World War, but they are determined to make history repeat itself. What's your analysis of why they did that and how it's likely to end?
Well, I'll tell you, and by the way, I'm absolutely delighted to be on here. And should I address you as Mr. Galloway? I've never actually talked to a former member of Parliament before. I just want to make sure I get that right.
George is fine, and I'll call you Daniel if I may.
That's even better. Thank you for that. I'll tell you, it is from a military perspective, it is really puzzling, because the things that go into winning or losing battles, and especially winning or losing wars, when you look at it at the strategic level, are just off the charts in the favor of the Russian side here. And it's very difficult. In fact, it's impossible for me so far to identify any militarily attainable objectives of this incursion into Kursk. Now, they caught Russia by surprise. Russia never thought that they would make an incursion into their country, mainly because it didn't make any sense that they would try to do so. So Russia had it lightly defended because they realized that if you divert that much firepower and manpower into an attack into a country the size of Russia, that it's just going to be absorbed in there almost. There's no reason for it to think it's going to success. So when Ukraine did the unthinkable, they did make some initial penetration, and they have a fairly sizable amount of territory as far as it goes. But the problem is you can't keep it. And what are you going to accomplish with it? They claim that it's anywhere from to make Russia hurt so that they feel the pain of war on the Russian side, to get a better negotiating position, and to cause Russia to redeploy some of its troops from the Donbass, et cetera. Those things are just not going to happen. Number one, on the negotiating part, it's actually caused the exact opposite. Russia had in June, I think June the 14th, Putin said, here is my latest and probably final negotiating offer, which was the 4 oblasts that they had illegally annexed in 2022. And he said, we'll take those and Crimea, and you'll go back to yours as long as there's no NATO in Ukraine. We'll have a negotiated settlement and end the war. They actually said that. Well, now then, that which was the worst possible outcome for Ukraine since the negotiations had started is now off the table. And so now what Russia is saying, as of today, they're saying now that because of this incursion here, we're just going to win the war, however long that takes. And they do have the wherewithal to do it. So I think that ultimately, while this is making really good splashes on the Western media right now, all it's going to end up doing is sealing the defeat, the military defeat of the Ukraine side, because they don't have the capacity to turn the tide.
But they were encouraged by at least some Western governments. Some people claim there's a difference between London and Washington on this matter. And that's not impossible. There was a difference between Thatcher and old George Bush over the first Iraq war. This is no time to go wobbly, George, said Mrs. Thatcher. And it's, I think, also a credible argument that Britain has been the more belligerent of the two, UK, US, in Ukraine and indeed elsewhere. Some say that there's a difference, but it is undeniable that NATO personnel, albeit rebadged as mercenaries, NATO weaponry, including those famous German tanks, and the encouragement of Joseph Borrell, the former EU foreign policy chief, and the British government. All of those have actively encouraged this invasion of Russia, which means they're either fools or knaves. They're fools if they can't see what you can see, and others like Colonel Macgregor can see, that Scott Ritter can see. They're either fools or they're knaves. They could see it, but encouraged it anyway. How do you read that?
Yeah, I do, and it's disturbing. If you're a fool or just stupid, that's one level of a problem. But if you're actually aware of what it's going to be and you go for and do it anyway because you may calculate that, well, it's going to hurt Russia, it's going to kill more Russian troops, and so anything that embarrasses Putin is good, so cool, let's go ahead and do that. But that comes at so much cost of blood to the Ukrainian people, which is one of the things that frankly animates and angers me more than anything else throughout this, is that the complete lack of concern about the cost on the Ukrainian people and land that our policies are having, because there is no rational military outcome for the Ukraine side. This will not turn anything around. If anything, it's going to hasten their loss. And for some people to be aware of that and to still support it because there is a temporary hurt on Russia, they're oblivious and quite frankly, fools of the highest order, because the net result will not be harm on Russia. It will be harm on the Western side. It will definitely be harmful for Ukraine side, but even our own side is going to be significantly damaged because just imagine, George, the net result of this. if things play out the way they almost certainly are going to with the Russian military victory, everything NATO and all of our combined efforts will have done for 2.5, possibly up to 3 years when this is all done, will have been failed and utterly defeated. And so that will make us look far worse than anything Russia did. Russia went from somewhere around 1 million active troops when the war started to now about 1.5 million. And now that they have a lot of combat experience, their weaponry is far more advanced than it was. Their ability to produce weapons is far higher than it was and far higher than ours is even now. So every way you want to look at this, we are harming our own national security and just decimating the Ukrainian people. It's terrible.
If I was in the Kremlin, I would not now stop this war until I had taken Odessa. I had taken the entire coastline and left a rump Ukrainian state landlocked. I would absorb Transnistria and I'd make sure that the government in Kiev was, to use the Russian word, nash. It was ours. It's a Ukrainian government, but it's ours. And there'll be no NATO, and there will be no fraternization of any kind between the government in Kiev with NATO and with Western powers. That's how I see this war ending now. What about you, Lieutenant Colonel?
Well, that seems to be the most likely outcome. It is just anguishing for, aside from the reasons I just mentioned, but because it didn't have to be this way. I mean, we had a negotiated settlement in April of 2022 in Istanbul that would have been fairly generous to the Ukraine side, that would have kept them independent, that would have kept them in control of all those cities you just mentioned that very well may fall still in their control. There would be hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians still alive to this day, and instead the losses just keep piling up by the hundreds or thousands every single day. And so the likelihood, if what you described, is certainly in the realm of possibility for the Russian side. Whether they'll go and take all those things remains to be seen, because there is still a cost to that. But now then, that is the most likely outcome, because of our policies continue to go down paths that are unsustainable, that are militarily unattainable, and that are just flat out foolish and self-defeating for our own side. That is why this is so hard for me to watch.
Yeah, self-harm. The whole thing is characterized by self-harm, if not suicide, for Germany and for the European economies and for NATO itself. But let's switch gear, Colonel, if we may, because there are many people who think that finally the balloon goes up in the Middle East this evening. There's been a NOTAM notice issued by the Iranian side. No one can fly on the eastern part of the country where the war material is. The whole thing's now in a state of heightened alert. It's now around 11 or midnight in Iran. It's about 11 or 10 in the evening in Israel-Palestine. Many people think that the balloon goes up tonight. What's your take on that? How limited is it credible to be? I heard Scott Ritter say earlier today that Iran will limit their action to a very painful series of actions, but not too painful. And under Russian guidance, have been advised to avoid civilian casualties, restrict the number of targets. In return, Israel will attack Iran back, but thanks to the new S-400 deliveries, the electronic warfare deliveries from Russia to Iran, no great strategic damage will be sustained by Iran, and that will be the end of this particular chapter. I don't myself see it that way, but I wondered if you did.
Yeah, ironically, that would almost be the best outcome if a tit and then a for tat ended the situation here. But I tell you, George, my worry is that that Netanyahu has been spoiling for a fight with Iran from the beginning. And if Iran does anything, that they'll use this as an opportunity to launch a full-scale war because he wants to draw the United States into it. You had a senior Israeli official give a public, open interview to Newsweek magazine last Thursday where they said, hey, war with Iran, war, not just a strike, but war is inevitable. So the United States should join with us now in some kind of preemptive strike. So that doesn't sound like the Israeli government is looking to just have a response, but they're looking to use this as an excuse to launch a war. And listen, I don't know what they're thinking either, because when you look at, again, strictly military balance, the Iron Dome is not this panacea that it's been painted in the public. It is definitely limited. And I assure you, if you'd had the combination of Hezbollah in Lebanon and Iran, they have significant missile capacity that could absolutely saturate anything that the Israeli side could do, and they could suffer significant harm if it got into a full-scale war. Iran doesn't want war. They don't want a war with the United States. They don't want a war with Israel. They would prefer not to have one. But if you push them too far, they will respond, and they have the capacity to have a lot of damage done. And as you point out, one of the other problems with our Russia-Ukraine policy is that there is spillover now in the Middle East, and Russia could provide not just defensive capability, but offensive capability, which Putin has said that he is willing to do, since we're providing offensive capability for the Ukraine side to fire into Russia. Now then you see this, compounding problems for us, because we could find ourselves in a war in the Middle East that we should never fight. And there is no easy way to win. I assure you, going to war against Iran, whether it's Israel by itself, U.S. by itself, or together, is a fool's errand that would be far worse than the Iraq war was that started in 2003.
Colonel, you mentioned there that they want to draw America into a war, which begs the question, who would run that war for the United States side? Plainly not Joe Biden, surely not Kamala Harris. Is there anyone in the White House? I mean, the lights are on, but is there anybody there in a war?
Well, I think that it would probably be Jake Sullivan would be the architect of anything that happened. But when we helped the Israeli side defend against the missile barrage, I think last April, when Iran attacked Israel in response to their embassy being destroyed, you had the senior U.S. military four-star general on site for the CENTCOM commander, Central Command, who was on site. And I don't know if he's still there now. I know he was again recently when earlier when they thought that such an attack or a response from Iran may be coming. So I think that you would probably have the senior general on the ground to make very direct coordination. But as an American, I find that very problematic, and I don't hesitate telling people so, because we have no military treaty with Iran, and yet you have Secretary of State Blinken, again, a couple of days ago, emphatically saying, we will defend Iran, as though we have some sort of treaty with him, or as though the U.S. Armed Forces is an extension of the Israeli armed forces, and it's not. But that's how it's being used. And, again, for our side, the United States, we have a constitutional provision that only the Congress, not the president, can take the United States to war. And yet that's exactly what is on the brink of happening right now, because no one's even discussing it, much less authorizing it. And these actions by our administration to let our armed forces be used by Israel for their own purposes could get us sucked into a war whether we want to or not. And there's nothing good about this and everything bad. It could go anywhere from bad to catastrophic for our side.
I watched the other day, I had no doubt that you did, and it's with no schadenfreude that I raise it, but I saw hundreds of millions of dollars worth of American weapons being paraded by the Taliban at Bagram Air Base, where once we used to torture some folks, to quote Barack Obama. That weaponry was left when the United States government fled from Kabul like a thief in the night, leaving. And a treasure trove of weapons, even helicopters. Who knew the Taliban could fly military helicopters? Well, they can now because I saw them flying over in the parade. This political class of yours, they say that war's too important to be left to generals or colonels. I think I'd trust a general. I'd definitely trust you, Colonel, before I'd trust these political leaders that presided over that kind of debacle. Did you see the parade? Is it a chastening thought that the United States hasn't won a war since 1945 and didn't even actually win that? It was won by others. Does that ever cross the mind of the political class?
No, it doesn't. It's for me, who had 2 combat deployments in Afghanistan, it was very painful and remains so because of how avoidable it was. I started publicly in 2009 talking about how we would lose this war if we didn't start making some changes. Of course, it was ridiculed at the time of anybody how ridiculous that the Taliban would ever defeat the U.S. And yet that's exactly how it turned out, because it wasn't any kind of brilliant idea I had. It was just I was willing to look at things as they were, and the military fundamentals that at play and the political fundamentals. And they played out exactly the way one would expect if you weren't looking at it emotionally. But our political class doesn't look at it that way. They don't look at the military realities because, frankly, most of them don't know the military realities. Like Lindsey Graham, one of the biggest mouthpieces that you always see with a microphone on his face in the U.S. side, just absurd in the things that he says, has no idea how military things work, but that doesn't stop the camera from going into his face every time tomorrow, and he'll ask again. They're not concerned about that. They're concerned about temporal gain and how can I make this speech? It's going to get me some kind of political gain here, and then we'll worry about the consequences later. But you see that because the loss in Afghanistan didn't affect anybody in the United States, it was an embarrassment for some. Most people didn't pay any attention at all. They just went on about their business. These situations, because of the pattern that's been set there, these situations in the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israeli-Hamas war, and potentially now adding to Iran, these are very different, because this could cause significant consequence and harm to our country, to our armed forces, and to our standing around the world. But the mentality of the people that are in charge don't know that, because they think that we're the greatest power on earth. President Biden on Monday in a speech in Chicago, again, made this statement, we're the greatest leader in the world and we're winning everywhere and the world is better for it, oblivious to the fact that almost the opposite is true, but yet that's the mentality that's animating him and many like him. And so when you see things that are physical and real like this, which could go very bad in a painful direction, and you hear these comments coming out, you can't help but really worry that we're going to run off a cliff one of these days.
Well, I can assemble and disassemble an SLR wearing a blindfold. I don't think Lindsey Graham could, or Kamala Harris, for that matter.
George, he couldn't spell SLR, I don't think.
Davis.
Thank you very kindly, sir. Appreciate it.
Absolutely right. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis, host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive, on which I shall soon be making a return appearance. Deeply grateful to you, sir. I salute your sagacity. Thanks for joining us. Look, in a very short time, we've got the one and only Richard Medhurst on the show. Can you believe it? Richard Medhurst, fresh from a prison cell. Never thought I'd be saying that to my young protege. But first, a couple of calls. David is in Ohio on the U.S. election. Go ahead, David.
Hello, George Galloway. How are you?
By the grace of God, good. What would you like to say, David?
Well, I want to say, number one, George, I am proud to call you a brother among all the people who are trying to spread the truth and to tell what is going on this planet.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Secondly, my brother, is this is not only about the elections, but we'll start with elections. You mentioned very boldly how all the ex-presidents and vice presidents have been enriched by the system, if you will, okay? And how they start, most of them, with very mediocre income and very mediocre fortunes, and then they end up having tens of millions by the time they get out of office. And one of my biggest problems, and this is not only for the United States, this is for the whole Northern Hemisphere, if you will, and all these so-called democracies that are anything but, unfortunately, in the middle of the 21st century, because all of them are for hire and for sale. The question to you is, when are we going to be bold enough and courageous enough to name the names of these kingmakers and the puppet masters who are financing, who are corrupting the system and paying pennies on the dollar when they give a president $20 million? We know that they have made $200 billion in return.
Yeah.
When are we going to have?
No,
when are we going to have the courage?
I'm ready to do it. Well, I've got the courage, and I infer that you do also. But in a way, it doesn't matter their name, because if it wasn't them, it would be someone else. It's the system that's corrupt, not the people. The people are also corrupt. In China, they'd be up against a wall and shot, and then their families charged for the bullet that killed them in the firing squad. I saw a guy today speaking at the DNC as a Democrat governor of Illinois, and he was making fun of Trump, claiming to be a billionaire, whereas I said the Democrat governor of Illinois actually am a billionaire. That's right. The Democratic governor of Illinois, in which Chicago sits, declared himself to be a billionaire. These people wouldn't last 5 minutes in politics in China, I can assure you. But the system is utterly rotten to the core. The US used to be a tiger. It was never a paper one. It was always a tiger. It's still a tiger. But it's rotten from the inside. Its teeth are rotten, falling out. It's lame. It's sick. And there are a lot of younger, leaner, fitter, hungrier, more dangerous tigers out there now. David in Ohio, thanks for that call. Let me take a quick break. Then it's Malik in Germany, followed by Richard Medhurst, followed by Gayatri's Media Roundup. You definitely don't want to miss the rest of this show, so stay tuned.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Has the Earth been visited by UFOs, yes or no? It's about 50-50, actually, which is a very intriguing fact because I'm not sure we've ever had a poll that was virtually a dead heat before. Get your vote in before. Well, you've only got about 10 minutes, 15 max, to get your vote in. Has Earth been visited by UFOs, yes or no? Malik is in Germany, but wants to talk about Russia and Iran. Go ahead, Malik.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. First of all, I would like to wish you a belated happy birthday to our Scottish tiger, if I may laugh.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I have been watching and listening few experts, but it appears their predictions about the outcome of these conflicts are not based upon the older and recent events, but their desired wishes. First, I would like to say about Russia that Ukraine conflict started 10 years ago, and now Russia has been for the last 2 years in active war against Ukraine. Against eigentlich, in fact, gang of bullies, which I call axis of evil. Till now, there has been no clear results. Their performance in Afghanistan was also not very jubilant. Now and then, Russia threatens to nuclear weapons to use, which shows that they are in a weak position. Now, coming to Iran, I would say there's a lot of talk about Iranian resistance and all that, but when your enemy comes to your house and kills your guest, it does not speak much for their strength. The axis of evil has got Russia busy with Ukraine and keeping China busy with Taiwan. China believes in soft takeover, but one has to take action sometime. This they have only done a couple of times against India. So this leaves the so-called.
Well, look, I understand your concerns, but China is busy confronting American designs in the Philippines, for example. It is giving support in other theaters of this conflict. It is relentlessly attacking the axis of evil for its policies in Latin America, in the Middle East, in West Asia, in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, and so on. So China definitely not sitting things out. And I don't believe that the Russian threats, not from Putin, but from others, from lesser leaders in Russia about nuclear weapons, are perfectly understandable when you are fighting the whole of NATO. And I infer, for the second time, I think, your lack of confidence in the government in Iran because it failed to protect its honored guest in its own special security zone in Tehran. And I think that is indeed a very embarrassing thing to have happened. But I think you're about to see the full might of Iran's response to that crime. And maybe the next time you call me, you'll have a rather higher opinion of them. Let's go to Ireland, Belfast, where my old friend Fra is recently returned from Iraq. Welcome back, Fra. How was it?
Thank you very much, George. It was an absolutely fabulous experience, and it's really the reason why I phoned into the show this evening. When I was offered the opportunity to go, the first thing that entered my mind was the shock and awe destruction of Iraq in 2003 with the illegal war by Britain and America, a war which you and Stop the War Coalition led 2 million people to the Houses of Parliament in an effort to stall or put off that attack. So this is the vision that I had of Iraq. I saw somewhere that was totally devastated that was still in conflict with the CIA MI6-backed ISIS terrorists, and also the ongoing destabilization of the American illegal occupation which remains in Iraq. But when I arrived, George, I saw Baghdad undergoing a huge reconstruction and rebuilding effort. I was on the bus to take the 2.5 hours down to Karbala for the 3rd International Conference on the Call of Al-Aqsa. And we were able to see the beautiful Levant, which I know you've been in many, many, many times. I could have been in Syria, I could have been Jordan, I could have been occupied Palestine. The beautiful scenery. And as you're probably aware, between the 11th of August and the 26th of August and the 25th of August each year, there are up to 26 million pilgrims who go from the mosque of Imam Ali in Najaf to the mosque of Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet. Those people, there are water stations, food stations, areas out of the midday heat in order to allow people to relax and cool down from their day's journey, all provided free by other Iraqi nationals and corporations and companies. And what I really wanted to say was my vision of Iraq was one of a third world, global south kind of total destruction. And what I saw and what I have seen could be seen anywhere from Berlin to Copenhagen to Dublin. All the shops were full, all the electronics gear. It just shows you how a country can be rebuilt from the ashes. And I just wanted to let people know that Iraq's not maybe what we all perceive it to be.
You described it. You described it very well. Some people say that Baghdad will soon be like Dubai. I personally hope not, and I certainly hope it maintains a higher moral and cultural level than that. But it's good to see Iraq getting back on its feet. That is for sure. I saw Iraq many times, as you say, but at the worst of times, under sanction and war. And I saw its destruction as the destruction of part of myself. Iraq entered my bloodstream and it has never left it. And even until today, if I hear the word Iraq, I turn as if someone called my name. So it's good that you went, and it's good that you were encouraged by what you found there. But I pray that Iraq never loses its way politically, culturally, morally. And I very much hope that that never happens. Thanks, Fra. Last call, I think, of the evening is Sean in Leicestershire on Ukraine. Go ahead, Sean.
Good evening, George. It's an absolute pleasure to speak to you. They say you don't want to meet your hero. You are definitely making an exception. How are you this evening, George?
Thank you. I'm good, by the grace of God, all good.
Yes, I just wanted to...
Hey there, Sean? Yep.
Yes, I just wanted to get your thoughts on really the British involvement with the Ukraine war. And as what I can gather from your program tonight, we're sort of entering the stages of where the Russians may well come in and swamp Ukraine itself. Will the British forces be used as saboteurs and sort of false flag agents? It doesn't seem that we're the peacekeeping force in the world that we once were.
I think that's a great call and a great question. I think that our special forces are there and are in action there without parliamentary knowledge, never mind approval. I think that our intelligence service, MI6, is there and is not being properly controlled in its actions, as it should be, by the Foreign Secretary, who is responsible for it, but then the Foreign Secretary is David Lammy, and what could you really expect from him? I think that British propaganda is at a visceral level against Russia, and has been for 150 years, long before the Bolsheviks, long before Putin, long before the invasion of Ukraine. There is a visceral, historic hatred in Britain amongst the ruling elite towards Russia, for reasons which I don't myself fully understand. But when our defense minister was little Ben Wallace, who has fled the scene and gone in or back to private industry, no doubt to make a packet or two, but when he was the defense minister, he was quite open about it. He wanted revenge for the charge of the Light Brigade, which was conducted by his regiment. He is was a soldier in the same regiment that came a cropper in the charge of the Light Brigade. That's the kind of mentality that the British ruling elite continue to harbour. Many of them are smarting from the defeat of the white armies, including the British and American and Japanese and French and even German forces in the war, in the Russian Civil War, following the triumph of the Bolsheviks in 1917 and the withdrawal of the foreign invading armies in 1922. But in that 5-year period, Britain had hundreds of thousands of soldiers fighting in Russia, based up in Archangel, fighting the Russians to try and reverse the Russian Revolution. So this all has a very, very long antecedent. But Russia today is not Russia in 1917. Russia today is a hypersonically armed, multiple warheads on one rocket could destroy the entirety of the United Kingdom in one strike. That's right, one missile, which breaks into 8 warheads, each of which is 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb exploded on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Each one 1,000 times more powerful. 8 of them on one missile. One flight, 8-10 minutes from Kaliningrad, and Britain is literally a field of cinders, and no human, animal, or plant life remains alive, and a nuclear winter descends upon Britain forever, making any re-emergence of even the bottom-dwelling slug impossible under that nuclear winter. So you've got to ask yourself, Sean, as I ask myself, and as the British people ask themselves, why are you dicing with death, you puny little power, by poking the Russian bear, which can destroy every person in this country with one rocket and in an instant? Sean, thanks for the opportunity of getting that off my chest. Now, as I said at the beginning, Richard Medhurst, when I first introduced him to you, was a young hopeful. I saw myself in him. Just a few years later, he's one of the most important journalists on the planet, internationally renowned, broadcasting and writing everywhere, and being listened to at the very highest levels, all of which qualified him to end up in handcuffs at Heathrow Airport just this last weekend. Let's hear straight from the horse's mouth. Richard Medhurst, I've never been happier to see you than I am to see you tonight. It was an utterly chilling experience. And for those who haven't yet heard you describe it, please reprise what happened to you at Heathrow last weekend.
Hi, George. Good evening, and thanks for having me. It's an honor to be with you, and I appreciate your kind words and support. What happened to me was a scandal, honestly. I mean, I was going to London. I was met at the entrance of the aircraft. They told me to come to the front of the plane, and suddenly there's these 6 police officers, one of them even in tactical gear, and they were telling me that I had to give them my bags and come off the plane, and they wouldn't really explain why. And then they said that I'm being arrested, so not detained, but arrested under the Terrorism Act, Section 12. I mean, to this minute, I really can't believe it. And they wouldn't really explain what exactly Section 12 meant. They basically put me in handcuffs, and they weren't just normal handcuffs. They were double locked and wrists on top of each other. So you're like this. I almost, to struggle to not fall over in the van. They drove me about 10 minutes to Heathrow police station. And they threw me in a cell, basically. They ransacked my bags and all this stuff, and then they threw me into a cell that was, I mean, it's more of a toilet than a cell, honestly. There was no toilet paper, no windows, barely any light, freezing cold. And you have to beg, you have to nag for the most basic of things. Since the moment they arrested me, I was saying, I just got off the plane, I'd like some water, please. I ended up waiting hours for one small cup of water. I also was told I'm not allowed to speak to my family. So, they were saying you have the right to tell someone that you're locked up. Well, I said I'd like to do that very much. And then they would answer, well, your calls have been withheld. And they even gave me a pamphlet that said I had the right to say it. And I was, I thought I better drop it. I better not even argue, because it felt like being in a primary school. You're being told to shut up even. So, it was basically not being told what I've done for about 15 hours, thrown in a toilet, and told to shut up. And it's a miracle that they called a solicitor, because I was honestly not expecting them to do it at all. And then they questioned me for about an hour, maybe it was an hour and a half, 2 hours. There's no need to keep me, almost 24 hours. I think they did it to intimidate me and to dehumanize me. And when I got to the station, they made me basically take off my shoes. I had to take off my socks. I had to pull the socks inside out and hold them up to a group of police officers for them to look at, and then hold up my feet. It's unbelievable, really.
It is unbelievable, even as I hear you describe it for the second time. The pen is mightier than the sword. But it is, after all, a pen. And a pen cannot, however you dice it, be described as a terrorist weapon. How did they even begin to make the argument that you were worthy of arrest and handcuffing under terrorism legislation?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not really at liberty to go into the questions, because I'm still under investigation. They might charge me in 3 months or whenever, and I have to go back to this police station. So I'm out on bail. I'm on pre-charge bail. Now, they told me it's unconditional, but I'll get back to that in a second. How did they begin to do this? Well, it's about my coverage regarding Palestine, fundamentally. That's what it is. And I feel like they're targeting me because I don't know which story it is in particular, but I was doing a lot of stuff recently. I was talking about the Israeli Olympic athletes, how they were saying pro-genocide and pro-war things and not being neutral. I was talking about the gang rape in State Amman, the massacres. So I don't know what it is that ticked them off. Maybe it was something from a few months ago as well. I really don't know, but I think they just, they just want to silence me. They want to have this case hanging over my head. Living in fear. Am I going to be charged? What can I say? Can I talk about what happened to myself? Can I talk about what's happening in Palestine? So they want to muzzle me, George. That's effectively what they're trying to do. And so they say it's unconditional, but it's not unconditional.
Your parents must be horrified. Your family has given distinguished service to Britain and indeed to the international community through the United Nations, Nobel Peace Prize winners. It is literally unbelievable, actually, that someone like you could end up in the circumstances that you ended up this weekend. But I would like to advise you that the decision to do this to you could not have been made by a simple police officer. No police officer has the idea that a man who just bought his ticket that morning should be met by 6 officers. You try getting 6 officers to any crime scene, one in tactical gear. This was not a police decision. This is a political decision, driven no doubt by the intelligence services, but a politically accountable decision to seize, like some banana republic, a distinguished British citizen, increasingly renowned for his broadcasting and journalism in the world. So I believe that the crime that was committed against you was committed not by the cops that were sent there, but by the political masters who took a decision that Richard Medhurst has to be cut down to size. Are you able to comment at all on that?
I don't know, honestly, but honestly, George, I'd be surprised if it were anything else. It certainly feels like a political persecution, and the thing is that I'm not going to say if it was because of foreign interests or not, because I genuinely do not know. But to be honest, the idea that that I would support or have anything to do with terrorism is preposterous. I mean, if you're going to arrest someone and send 6 police officers, you obviously have some idea who you're arresting and what their profile is. So they know I'm a journalist, and they know who my father is. He was in the Metropolitan Police. He's an authority on counterterrorism, right? Counterterrorism. So he taught me a lot about that as well. I mean, I myself, I'm a victim of terrorism. When we were posted in Islamabad, when I was in the British school, there was a double suicide bombing in the building next door, the Egyptian embassy, and while I was inside the school, I remember that. And I condemn terrorism. I want nothing to do with terrorism. I think the idea that I would have some kind of ill intention towards the country or something like that is preposterous. The 6 officers coming to arrest me, and again, I'm not talking about them personally, but this kind of intimidation, that is a form of terrorism. They're literally trying to terrorize you into shutting up. They're trying to make you submit and stay quiet. And I can't allow that to happen. I have a moral duty. I have to continue my work. But the problem is now that the threshold for the Section 12 of the Terrorism Act is so low, it is so draconian, that truly anything at all, can be skewed into the most preposterous crime. They can take anything that you have said, or even something you didn't say, and accuse you of terrorism. I mean, I really, if I could only speak freely, I think you would be 10 times as shocked as to what happened, George, really. But there's no doubt it's a political persecution. I feel like my coverage on Assange also might have annoyed some people. And the fact that I've been coming to England, and this is my country, and I've been invited all up and down the country, and east and west to speak, and they don't like that. So the idea that we're going to submit and yield to Zionism and these kinds of interests, I mean, they're trying it on the wrong person.
Amen. I'll not tempt you further, Richard, because I can sense that there are limits to what you can tell us. But please accept the full solidarity of everyone at the mother of all talk shows, and I'm sure everyone watching this show this evening. What's the best way that people can show their support for you right now?
Just to make noise, just to highlight how absurd the terrorism act is and unjust it is. I mean, I was literally criticizing it as I was getting on the plane, and then I got arrested under it. It's really remarkable. So the best way they can support is just to make noise and try and raise awareness and put pressure on the organizations that are for free speech and journalism to also issue statements in against the Terrorism Act, because it's not just about me. This is the beginning of an escalation. They're making an example out of me, and they'll go after others because they've usually detained people. They've never. I don't know of any cases where they actually arrested journalists under Section 12. So I think I'm the first one, and it's not going to stop here. So I'm grateful to everyone for their moral support, and it really goes a long way. It's really cherished. Thank you, George.
Richard Medhurst, renowned independent journalist and political analyst. Thank you, as always, for being with us on the mother of all talk shows. Just before Gayatri, a last call from Richard in Bristol on RFK. Richard, go ahead.
Hello, George. Thank you for speaking to me. I've always admired you.
Thank you, sir.
What I want to talk to about RFK, I mean, to put him in charge of dismantling the FBI or the CIA, well, you just got to look what happened to his kinsman on that. I don't think he'd be suitable.
Maybe that's why he's the best man to do it, Richard.
Well, yeah.
After all, they were all involved in murdering his uncle and murdering his father.
Yeah, well, you don't want to give him a hat trick, do you? That's
well, but if it was me, if I was the soul of JFK or RFK, I'd be hoping that my son would take revenge, and
I'd want my son to stay alive.
I'd prefer my son to take revenge. No, I'd prefer my son to do what was right, rather than merely stay alive. There are worse things than death, Richard, and dishonor is definitely one of them. The death in the cause of righteousness is no death at all. The brave man dies only once. The coward dies 1,000 times before their death. So I personally hope that Donald Trump does appoint RFK Jr. to abolish the CIA. And I think that the soul of RFK Sr. would be smiling down upon him as he did it. Thanks, Richard. You were the last call. I'm sorry to have cut you short because my good wife is sitting right next to me with the social media roundup. What's rattling, Gayatri?
A lot of our audience is very, very concerned about what had happened to Richard Medhurst. So they tuned in to listen, if they had not already, like us, watched his chilling testimony, really, on how they treated him. Margaret says, I am truly concerned about what is happening in the UK and abroad around free speech. What happened to Richard Medhurst is chilling. What is next? Those who watch this show are guilty of some crime. How do we stop this march into fascism? Where in the world is safe? I'm very disturbed by everything that is happening, so what words of wisdom can you share? Before you do so, Wilson also says, who would have thought through the elected ruling system, again, who would have thought the elected ruling party in the UK would have political prisoners within a month of being in power? What's next, Comrade Starmer? The gulags? Exile into the cold, harsh salt mine? This farce won't continue without people exercising the right to protest. This government will fail, and Starmer, he will bring about his own downfall.
I feel that. You know, I'm an optimist by trade. If I wasn't, I'd have given up the fight long ago. As to words of wisdom, I'm staying to fight. I'm not going to go quietly into a Britain where renowned journalists get taken off planes in handcuffs and charged as terrorists for their views, for their opinions.
Yeah.
I'm staying, and my body will lie here in this land in which I was born. But if I was going to leave, and if you want to leave, well, President Putin has just made it very, very easy and
very attractive.
Very attractive offer. Westerners can now go and live in Russia.
Get a piece of land?
And get land in Siberia. If they share Russia's values, family values, faith values, the values of morality. And if they do, I mean, you and I both know Russia very well. It's a wonderful place to live. And with the offer that Putin is making, it's tempting even to some of my children, but it will not be tempting for me. I'm staying right here, even if I'm the last man standing that's not in handcuffs, and even if I'm the last man taken away in handcuffs. I'm going nowhere. Have you got anything final before we close?
Finally, because we are closing indeed. We received this lovely card. Ashley, thank you so much for sending us this card. He sends us a very long letter about how he respects and cares for you and the family, all your work. He actually came to Rochdale during the campaign, and he met our friends over there, and he actually went out with Councillor Minam into the wards, did all the leafleting. So thank you for that, Ashley. And I love this bit. He said, here is attached £20 to take Gayatri and the kids for chips after MOATS.
Ashley, you are a gentleman, and I have to meet you to thank you in person. Councillor Minam, Councillor Farouk, my chief Imtiaz, my agent Jamil, all my friends in Rochdale, I miss you so much. And Ashley, thank you. I'll take them all for chips. Chips are cheap round here, so I can feed all of my children tonight on that one £20 note. Thank you, all of you, for watching. Thanks for everyone who participated in the show tonight. God willing, I'll be back here on Sunday for the mothership, for the mother of all talk shows. And if you've enjoyed it tonight, please come back on Sunday at the same time to the same place and bring another viewer with you. We're now just short of 4 million per week. How about that then? If I can get to 4 million, they'll never put me in handcuffs, because there will be too many of you who would be watching. It's been a pleasure. Come back soon.